Okay, I think we've got everybody back. Mark and Mike are both muted.
Yeah, it's not letting me unmute Mark.
Oh, I think,
there we go.
There you go.
what about me?
You're good.
There.
And Mike, is Camtasia running?
Yeah. All right, be safe. Love you.
All right, love you too.
Bye. That was my husband.
Bye.
All right, so should we start?
Yep, go ahead, Amanda.
Okay, thanks. So I was just saying we should probably all introduce ourselves since we're recording this and give a little bit of information on where we are in standards-based learning. So my name is Amanda Meyer. I teach biology in the high school level in Springfield, Minnesota. And last year was my first year kind of full standards-based learning, even though I've been kind of heading in that direction for many years. I use a basically 1 to 4 scale in a kind of different ways depending on what the students are doing.
Amanda, I'm going to be right back. You keep going, but my husband just locked me out of the house, and he left. I have no key. Not even joking. So I'm going to try and catch him before he goes, but keep going. I'll be back.
No problem. So I use a 1 to 4 scale. I use a traditional gradebook, though, so I think we're going to maybe talk a little bit about how that works this morning. And I have about 3 rubrics that we use, and learning standards that are both content-based and skill-based. So that's, in general, what I'm all about. Next.
Hassan, you're next.
Okay. I started standards-based grading last year. I have my content organized in learning cycles, and learning cycles cover a group of related learning targets. I also use a 4-point rubric. I only have 1 at the moment, and the rubric is based on Bloom's tax. So I move from being a knowledge level 2, applying level 3, and then creating level 4. And I pretty much walk my students through it. So for knowledge, they just have to talk to me. For applying, they have usually a quiz or lab write-up, and then students can choose to go for 4, in which they have to create some teaching artifact, or they can just go on to the next learning cycle after they reach a 3. And we use the Haiku learning management system, and it has active grade as part of one of the gradebook options, which is very good. Next year, I want to start adding my year-long learning targets. This year, I only did learning targets for each unit, and now I want to incorporate the ones that I come back to in year 2. So that's my thing.
Lindsay, you're up.
Okay, I got in the house. I teach 10th grade English. I teach reading also, but I haven't applied in much of the flipped or standard-based that. To 75, it was like 75% essential skills, which were basically standards, but I still was like calling them assignment titles. So like by the story they were reading, and I found that to be, I felt like I was making too many exceptions to my grade book because they could still do the skill. It didn't have to be with that particular content we're reading. So then I still had work habits in there, but I'm taking those out this year, and I had practice assignments in there, but I'm taking those out. So I'm going as much as I can standard-based. Mine's going to be semester, like grading. I do grading by semester, but I do planning by quarter. My principal wants me to do like 4-week checks because she said that way there'll be something in the grade book before the parent gets an email, like a grade. She wants the parent to have like a 4 weeks heads up if a kid is technically failing at that point, like if they haven't attempted any standards. So I haven't done this in the classroom yet, other than last year's just like kind of stage 1 standard-based grading, I guess. I guess that's all, unless you guys have questions.
No, you're good. Mark, you're up.
I'm sitting in my Volkswagen Jetta. No, this is, so I brought standards-based grading to our high school. It was 4 years ago. I just started doing a lot of reading about, well, it's kind of, I brought flipped class and standards-based grading learning all at the same time, which is kind of insane. That's a whole other story. And we are the only department in the building that does that. Now I'm leaving this place, and I'm going to be the only person in the entire school that does it. But my new administrator is like totally on board. So my learning targets standards come from the Minnesota Science Standards, both content and skill, but I started yanking some stuff from the next generation science standards. I use a 1 to 4 scale. Everything in my grade book, almost everything in my grade book is formative. Probably over the course of 12-week trimesters, I've had 5 or 6 summative things. The past year was all about feedback, sitting down and having conversations with students, really getting to know what they know and just kind of pushing them to learning. They still live in a points world, and so that was, you know, one of the things on the doc is about pushback. We'll get to that eventually, but it's been great. It's just been transformative for my career. You know, this is my 31st year of teaching.
Wow.
It's been a good journey this last 4 or 5 years. So I look forward to this. I'm going to a college prep school, so this is going to be an interesting year, I think. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. And William's going to get in the car right now, so you hear the door slam. I will. Come on in. It's okay. I won't face.
What?
What? Yeah, okay. Okay. Enough about me.
Thanks, Mark. Mike, you're up.
All right, cool. I'm Kate Baker. I've been teaching ninth grade English in New Jersey for 16 years now. I flipped my classroom, but I haven't done standards-based grading yet. I've tried a little bit of mastery, and I've tried some gamification, and I want to move into standards-based grading because I think it will give a more accurate picture of what student performance looks like. We use Common Core standards currently in my district. We all have a very set curriculum that we have to teach at specific times of the year. So I have a set of books of titles I have to go through at the same time every year, which is good. I don't have to worry about content. So it's a matter of what I want to do with my content. But I've always been driven by content. So this is a new way to think about things, is to look at it from the skills perspective and from the standards. Pretty much my experience with just standards-based stuff has been, okay, what numbers am I writing for the standards on my lesson plans? And then I have done a little bit of work with curriculum writing from our standards-based perspective. But I really want to delve into the nitty-gritty and the day-to-day, and what does that look like for the whole marking period of doing standards-based. So, Amanda, I think you should lead us with all of the questions and everything for the rest of this GHO.
Why? Thank you for that appointment, Kate. You were doing just fine. No, seriously, I do want to have it be kind of, whatever comes up, whatever we want to talk about. So I guess we could start with, maybe what it looks like day to day. That might be a good place. And then make sure we get into Hassan's question about, the year-long standards-based targets. But yeah, maybe it'd be good to talk about day to day and how this works, because Kate, you're interested in that, and Mike, you got kind of in the weeds, it sounds like, last year. And so maybe a little discussion would help. And I can kind of kick that off. And in a science classroom, I don't think it is any different than what it would be in another classroom, but I'll just explain it from a science perspective, and then I'll try to keep it short and other people can jump in. My students, because I do have a flipped classroom, my students get all of their content not from me, so they either get it from a video I make, or from an iBook I made, or from their textbook, or if this is an English class, they're reading a book, or they're going to a website, or they're getting their content some other way. I don't really deliver content in front of the room, and so that piece is taken out, which means we have time to do lots of other things, and those lots of other things are basically all their formative work. So because it's a science class, we start with some sort of way to get them interested and hooked first. So like at the beginning of the year, which I'm thinking about right now, I get them outside, they're looking at their environment, they're collecting data, and that's the very first thing we do before we do any content. And they grab some content about whatever it is we need to know, and then we continue to collect data. They write lab reports, they do activities, they do games, they do presentations, they do all sorts of just the stuff you would do every day in class anyway without a grade. So we just do all this stuff to help them learn. And again, that might vary from class to class, but we all have those things. The things we're already doing in class that help our students to understand something better, but I just don't grade it. I'm giving them feedback generally on those, or your feedback. So it's in the process, it's checking in with them in teams. My students work in teams a lot, and so a team will report out what they're thinking, and we'll talk about that. So that's the kind of feedback they're mostly getting. Where I do my formal feedback is when they're writing up. It can vary what it is, but just for sake of not getting into this in too much detail, we'll call it a lab report. So if they're writing a lab report, I'm going to give them formal written feedback on that because we have Schoology as our LMS, which allows for awesome way to do written feedback as well as recorded voice audio feedback on Schoology. And so when they do a big lab report, that's the kind of feedback I'm giving them on that. And so we're working our way through these activities, through these learnings, through the labs. All of it is basically ungraded except for the lab. I do have a rubric for grading the lab. And then at the end we do a summative assessment. The summative assessment is usually 4 questions because I usually do 4 standards at a time. And those are my content standards, whereas the lab is the skill standards. And those 4 questions are short answer to essay questions that are all application questions. And Kate mentioned this either in our Voxer chat or somewhere else that, you know, she lets her kids use their resources on those summative assessments, and I do as well. They keep a science notebook, and they can use anything they have in there on those summative assessments because I purposely design those questions so that it's not something they've written down the answer to in their notebook. They have to synthesize everything that they've learned to answer those questions. And each question is paired to a target or a learning standard. So question 1 is this question about this particular learning standard, and question 2 is a question about this one. So like I said, 3 to 4 at a time, and then I do offer retakes on those. So that went longer than I wanted to, but that's kind of what my day-to-day looks like. Who would like to talk about theirs next or ask questions?
I'll jump in because mine is similar to yours, and I'll just sort of say where we depart. So the same thing as Amanda with the sort of exploration and flip class and all that stuff. My students, most of the time, they're doing formative work and giving, most of the time, verbal feedback. Sometimes kids may bring their iPad to me, and if they do their work on Notability, there's this cool feature where you can record your voice on the kid's iPad. So when they bring the iPad to me, that's how I'll give them feedback. And a lot of times, you know, they'll have to do, they'll give me the work, I'll give them comments, and I won't say it's done until I'm happy with it. So they won't actually get a grade, but I'll say, okay, it's done, you know, and done is everything is pretty much right. And then there's a point in time where after they've done the formative assessment, the first sort of thing that the first major thing is the one-on-one talk that I call the hot seat. And that once they successfully have this one-on-one conversation with me, they move up the rubric to a level 2. And then for a level 3, they take a quiz, and I mentioned the other stuff before. After each learning cycle has 1 to 3 quizzes, depends on the number of learning targets. But what I didn't do and I want to do this year is actually have the traditional sit-down tests after a certain number of learning cycles, sort of like a cumulative thing. What I'm wrestling with, and I would like your advice on at some point today, is imagine the tests will cover, let's say, 2 or 3 learning cycles, and that may be, you know, I don't know, 6 or 8 learning targets. Now, if the kids don't do well on portions of the tests, at this point they've already moved up the rubric to a level 3, but now they showed, you know, some misunderstanding of a target that was already covered. You know, that's my dilemma. What do I do? Do I say, okay, now you have to go back and, you know, revisit some of those learning targets that you didn't do well on the test, or is it maybe I'm just giving them the test as a check-in, and they have to keep track of what things they need to make sure they have for the final? I don't really know what I'm going to do with that.
Can I ask a couple of clarifying questions? So your grades, when you have them bring the stuff up to you, and you say that it's done, does the grade then go in a grade book for it?
No, I don't record it at all.
Oh, okay.
Because all that stuff is formative stuff. Unless it's a lab, like a lab report, I actually do, you know, give them a real grade with a rubric and stuff. But the other stuff is just either you've done it or not. And then when it's time for them to have the one-on-one conversation with me, I actually tell them to bring some of that stuff that they've already gotten feedback on, just to make sure kids aren't sort of skipping steps. And this may be something for Mike, or mentioned something about kids skipping stuff, is I saw that kids were more than to get stuff from a friend. And so, you know, I saw there's sort of two checks. The check during the formative time where, you know, I tell them it's done or not, and then they have to show it to me again. Well, not all of it, but some assignments I want to see again for the one-on-one conversation before they even get permission to have the one-on-one conversation.
Okay, and then what does your grade book look like at, you know, towards the end of the marking period? Is it, do you have a lot of differentiation between their grades? Do you see that, like, I mean, does it do that standard, you know, or the traditional bell curve, like, or do you see more so that a lot of your students have the same grades?
Yeah, I see that most of, I mean, it's a color code thing, so most of them are green. Because I tell them in order to pass, we're pass-fail in my middle school. So in order to pass, I tell them these are the learning targets that you have to have a level 3 on. So they'll if they need a scramble at the end to get their summative assessments done, they'll do that before the end of the quarter.
Oh, okay. So you know what? I think I need to backtrack. So then what? So your end of the marking period grades are just pass fail, not A, B, C, D, E, F.
Yeah, I don't have to deal with grades, fortunately.
Because I'm trying to make this all work because we follow the, you know, the 100-point scale. So my students at the end of the marking period will have an 89 or a 90, you know, like there's some kind of, you know, there's a number that goes with it. Okay, so the pass fail makes, oh, that makes things so much nicer.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I mean,
can I speak to that real quick, Kate? Because like I said, I have a traditional grade book, and I know Mark has done this too, and I think, Lindsay, you have some ideas on how you're going to do this. So what I have done is I've taken the level, okay, first of all, we have to look at this in two different ways because I treat my assignments differently. So their lab reports, because those are process skills, like I said, I give them lots of feedback on that, and they basically don't get a score on that until that's proficient. Their summative assessments, their tests per se that I was kind of trying to describe, they can retake those, and I have different, we could talk about retakes later, but they can retake those. So on the process skills, they pretty much have like very similar grades. Basically, they have 3s or 4s, and I can talk about what those look like in my grade book in a minute. And that's it. I don't give them a score unless they're proficient. So it's 3s or 4s, moves on. Because I feel like it's not content-based. It's something you're all going to get it one way or another. The summative scores, I do see great variation in what they end up getting. They get very few 4s. I mean, you have to really know your stuff in order to get a 4. And I know Mark has talked about this before in his class too. Like, getting a 4 is tough. I say most of them, especially the first time around, are in like the 2 range, and eventually they get their scores up to a 3 to a proficient. And then there's some that are 1s, and they just don't do the work to ever get any higher than that. And so in my grade book, I do have quite a range of grades, because then what happens is in my grade book, a 1 is a 6.5 out of 10. I have all my scores are out of 10, because that's just easy for me to make percentages. So a 1 is 65%, is 6.5 out of 10. A 2 is 75%, 7.5 out of 10. A 3 is 85%, and a 4 is full points, 10 out of 10. Did I skip one?
No.
No, that's right. Okay, so so when you look at my grade book at the end of the semester, I do have a wide range. You know, those lab reports are kind of a buffer, because like I said, everybody's getting an 8.5 or a 10 out of 10 on those lab reports. But the summative ones, you know, that can really change where their grade is depending on basically work put in. They get to use all the resources that they want to. But if they didn't do stuff, like Mike was talking about, like if you didn't do your stuff in class, or, you know, you didn't participate in that group activity, you didn't record what happened, you didn't record the results, you didn't, you know, whatever, you don't have a very good notebook, and you're not going to do very well in the summative because you don't have your resources in order. And like I said, they have retakes, but some kids, as we well know, don't want to do that. And, you know, So, yeah, that's kind of how it fits into mine.
On your 4-point scale, do you do like a, half scores, like a 3.5? Or
No.
is it one of those numbers?
I started that at the beginning of the year. I like fudged it a little bit. Like, okay, it's not quite a 4, but it's better than a 3. But then I was like, that really, now I'm back to, instead of a 4-point scale, now I'm at an 8-point scale. And the whole point of standards-based grading is to eliminate those levels. And so in the second half of the year, I really tried to commit to just straight out whole numbers.
Okay. One of the rubrics I use is OSU, because, numbers with an English teacher, so I kind of quantify it with descriptors. So I'll use outstanding, satisfactory, and unsatisfactory. So it's more like quality-based, and that's something easy for them to understand. And then I make it like the outstanding is 100%, and you have to work to get that. The S, satisfactory, is like 87, 88. Sometimes I waver on that one. Like sometimes I feel like it should be an 85, and then other times I think, I don't know. I waver on what that exact number is from year to year. And then the U, unsatisfactory, is 74%. Because we follow our scale with grading. 100 to 92 is an A. 91 to 83 is a B. 82 to 74 is a C. 73 to 70 is a D. And then 69 to 0 is the F. And so when I kind of make it OS or U, they're not so focused anymore and like, oh, I want my A. I want my, they're not focused on that percentage anymore, and they're focused just on the quality. And I used to do that, like, oh, I'll put an S plus. But then I was like, wait, it's still just an S. Like, it's still just a satisfactory because it's not outstanding. So therefore, why am I enabling them with that half score? Like, very clear cut. So yeah, I was right there with you on that one, Amanda.
Well, I think the other thing, am I mute? No. The other thing about the half scores, it's almost like, I know I've seen people online that have the half scores and they do standards-based grading, but what I found that is it's almost like an easy way out. It's sort of like I can't give a label to this, so I'm gonna And the other thing is that I think the benefit of condensing the levels, or have a condensed rubric, is, how do I say this? I think having more levels in a way tricks you into thinking that you have I don't know what's level of precision that you don't necessarily have. So on the 100-point scale, you give something a 98 versus a 97, but we really don't have the tools to really honestly distinguish between a 97 and 98. If you look at like the SATs and some of those major standardized tests, we acknowledge that there are issues with those, and those have years and years and millions of dollars poured into it. So to think that our tests, our sort of favorite questions, can truthfully delineate between a 97 and 98, I think is a bit delusional. And so I think condensing the scale is a more honest representation. And I think Mark is muted or something. Yeah, Mark is muted. You guys see that?
Yeah, he joined with both his accounts now. Because I did invite him under both accounts.
I couldn't mute him before. No. He can unmute himself. Oh, there he goes.
I'm unmuted. Yeah, I wanted to turn off my phone. So hopefully that one goes away.
Mark, you have something to say. You want to jump in on this, don't you?
Yeah. Kind of rewind the tape. Talking about precision, I don't do pluses or minuses, so it's straight. There's no A minus, there's no B plus, and that was hard for kids, but it's all about being real, I think, with trying to give them good feedback that says, yeah, you know it at this level, and you said it, 98%, 97%, 93%. What's the difference? I'd ask kids who were coming from math class who got an 80% on their test. What does that mean? Well, 80% of what? If I tell you you're proficient, and you can look at the learning target that says, I can identify the process of cellular respiration and describe what happens. Now you've got something, I think, really concrete. And so that's one of the things I like about standards-based grading is that man, we're really given specific feedback about that. This part of the conversation started back in the Volkswagen, and you were talking about what it's like day to day. If you remember, that's kind of what this started out as. In my classroom, I hear what Amanda is saying and Hassan is saying with regards to having those conversations with students and making sure that they know exactly what's going on with where their learning is at. My learning cycle is kind of an amalgam of the 5 E's from Roger Bybee at BSCS, and Paul Anderson with the Quivers, and Ramsey Musallam with Explore, Flip, Apply. And it's kind of all of those things put together. And I'm not saying it's better or worse, but clear learning targets. Research has shown that students do better if they have clear learning targets, and then giving them feedback to try to get there. Then that I think students have a hard time with that, especially the feedback, because they're so used to getting something back that it's like one and done, and then they refuse to move forward to getting better at something, better learning, and so we've trapped them. It's like they come to, at Dassel Cokato, the high school that I'm leaving, they come to an island where we're all thinking, all the science teachers are thinking the same way and giving feedback the same way, and then they go to their social studies class or whatever, where it's I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's different, and I think are giving feedback, constantly giving feedback, and trying to encourage them to not be stuck on that one and done mentality. It's just there's so many things that's just swimming in my head, because this has been, Carol Dweck and fixed mindset. Holy cow. Rick Wormley and that whole, the bottom of 0 to 60 being an F, rather than just being like 1, recoverable. Give these kids hope. So, and on a day-to-day basis, kind of what happens in my classroom, just like Amanda mentioned, there's some kind of hook, lab. And then from there, they've got some curiosity. They go to try to find some information, and then that's where the feedback comes in. I've used Moodle as my learning management system. I'm moving to Haiku, so Hassan, I should really yak with you about this. And used just short little 5-10 point quizzes, where out of a big pile of questions that Moodle randomizes, that's the content part of it, and then students are just always trying to get to proficient before they move on to some type of summative assessment. Summative assessments in my classroom typically are over 3 or 4 learning targets. And kind of think of a learning target as like, in Minnesota we've got these huge standards. They're big and wordy, and the learning targets have kind of broken the standard apart. And so one summative assessment might be over one standard, but there's actually like chunks of that standard. I don't know how to say the guy's last name, Frank Nocesi. He's a physics teacher from New York somewhere. He published something a long time ago, I want to say 6-7 years ago, that published one of his tests. And right in the test, he had a rubric for a learning standard or learning target, and then a restatement of the learning target, and then pretty much the test was just like that. And that's, as a department, that's kind of what we did. We started every unit with, let's build the assessment, so kind of backwards design, right? What do we want to assess? And then from there, we kind of built all of the things that we did to support those learning targets. So I have to kind of reinvent some of that stuff in my new position. So I'm looking forward to that, though. I've been working on that all summer. I'm looking for cheap bowling balls, by the way. Can you help me find some cheap bowling balls?
I saw you were talking to someone on Twitter about that.
Casey Rutherford had a shopping cart full of them. I'm like, dude, where'd you get those? It's like a thrift store. I'm like, ugh. Yeah. So.
All right, Lindsay and Mike, we haven't heard much from you lately, so do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share?
Mike, do you want to go or you want me to? Okay. You go ahead.
I can start. My formative assessments look different every day and every unit, and I don't have a real set way I always do formative assessments because they kind of change with the content. I find there's better ways to assess different content. So I'll just give you a few examples though of what I have done. So the thing that I mentioned about my groups working in teams, lots of times I'll do, to get at the content, to see how they're doing on content, I'll do a little kind of team-based quiz where they will take this little 5-question quiz individually first, and again I manage that through my LMS, so it gives me their scores automatically because it's just a multiple choice quiz, and so I get to see automatically how I'm really most interested in how my class is doing on certain targets. So on this target, the class is doing pretty well, and this one not so good. And then immediately after they've taken that 5-point individual quiz, I do a team quiz on the same questions. And so they get together in a group and they answer the same questions, but they have to talk about them at this point. So they're kind of learning from each other. And there's this system of these, like, I don't want to take too much time to describe this, but they're called if-at, IF-AT forms that are little, like, lottery ticket scratch-off forms where they can, as a team, decide, okay, our answer is letter A for this question. And we scratch off letter A. Oh, Mike says he has them. Good. Okay. So you scratch off letter A, and then the team knows, okay, that's right, that's wrong. If we want to try again, where did we go wrong? So I do like that team quiz afterwards. And the if-at forms come in these big, like, sheets, and so I just cut them apart into little 5-chunk sections. And so team, but also there's, like, formative assessment that's not, like, doesn't really get a grade with it. So I'd bring my students through some sort of problem or activity as a class where they're working in teams to, like, explore something and discover something, and then they have to whiteboard about it. And then each team has to go around and present their whiteboarding, and we have a conversation, and I can kind of tell from that, okay, where do we need to spend more time? How are the kids doing? So I wouldn't necessarily record a formative grade for that. Really, and then there's also, I mean, there's other things that I do for formative assessment. Sometimes I'll do, like, if it's a actual skill-based thing, like when we're using microscopes, for example, they have to, like, show me they can do this, 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 and this on the microscope. And that's a formative thing. So it really changes from, you know, unit to unit. But I don't put all those formative scores in the grade book. Really, it's, for me, kind of an evolving, like, where are my kids at right now? Where do I need to spend more time? Because that's really my big thing, is I'm very flexible. If I feel like my whole class or a portion of my class is needing more time on something, I'm going to adjust it. So that's what my formative assessment is all about. Like, where are we going to go as a class? And so I don't record a ton of formative stuff in the grade book. It's really for me and for my students to judge where they are. And again, there's lots of different ways I get at that information. I mean, everything, there's all the digital formative tools. There's, you know, the Socrative and the Kahoot and the Learning 360. And, you know, I incorporate all of those off and on throughout the units to try to just really see where my students are. And so the only things I really record that are formative would be those in-process lab reports. So if they're on a lab report, that would get recorded.
Yeah, I also, I try to use as much as I can some of the time-saving formative assessments, so some of the online things that Amanda mentioned, like the Socrative and Kahoots and online quizzes and stuff like that. Yeah, I also use problem sets as well, and problem sets I may share partial answer keys, because the idea is I want them to get feedback without, you know, needing to talk to me. If there are things that they can go on without, you know, I'm the only person in the room, you know, I'm the only teacher in the room, and so I want to make sure my time is, you know, used for when people really need help. And of course, I encourage students to help each other, but I like to rely on things that I don't necessarily need to look at, and they can still get feedback. I also do my class is asynchronous, so they're going through this at their own pace, but there are times where at the beginning of classes, I may have like a full class formative assessment, so some kind of modified game or something to give me feedback about how kids are doing.
Nice. I'm backwards.
I also use peer instruction. I don't know, Mike, if you're familiar with peer instruction, but I like to do some peer instruction maybe 2 or 3 times a learning cycle if I can. And like Amanda, the full class formative assessments, I use those primarily to gauge where the whole class is. And so if I need to, you know, stop everyone and clarify some misconceptions, activities based on how the whole class is doing, that gives me that feedback. And then there are the individual assignments like problem sets, online quizzes and stuff that give the kids feedback to know if they're ready to sit for their summative assessment.
I'll talk a little bit about formative assessments. You know, I talked about like Moodle or Haiku will do the same thing. So ExamView has ExamView's software that came with our textbook. It's test generator, except for the fact that all the questions on the test generator suck. So I don't use any of the questions. However, making questions in Haiku or making questions in Moodle is brutal. And so I use ExamView just as a tool to build multiple choice questions. So that's kind of so students watch a screencast or whatever, they've gathered some information, they just do a quick check of how they've done. I do record those in my grade book because parents like to see that stuff, that's something that they're doing something. Those are quick and dirty. Those are not my favorite kind of formative assessments. My favorite kind of formative assessments, I have all the learning targets and kids' names on a spreadsheet piece of paper. I walk around and I talk to kids. I have that, and then I also almost always have a chunk of whiteboard with me with a pocket full of markers, and I hand that to them and I said, show me what you know. And those are really powerful. At the beginning of the year, kids are scared. They're scared of that. Oh my God, the teacher's sitting next to me. You know, Hassan and Amanda have heard me say this before because they kind of freak out. They're like, why? I must be in trouble. No, I just want to see what you know. But by the end of the first trimester, the kids liked that because it became comfortable. Then, you know, I don't know how big your school is, but, you know, I probably would pick up another, you know, 2/3. I keep a third of the same kids, and I don't know what my new school is going to be like, but it's going to be kind of like that. And so now I've got to retrain those new students, and that's good too because I get to know some new learners. So formative assessment in my classroom look a lot of, you know, they look different. I certainly give feedback on everything. Not everything gets put in the grade book. You know, I think I talked about being a coach. It comes down to you got to do the practice. You got to practice. And, you know, what do you need to practice? If you need to practice titrations, then you got to practice titrations. If you need to practice just memorizing parts to a cell, you got to practice. So formative assessments in my classroom, you know, they have a variety of different looks. So I think you got to find out what works for you. I hear what you're saying about keeping track of everything. Last year, you know, I probably have like 120 students a day. I talked to a high school last spring, and one of the guys, I told Amanda this, one of the guys said, how'd you scale this up? I'm like, scale this up? I'm thinking in my head 120 is pretty good a day. He's like, I've got 180 students. I'm like, oh, how do you scale that up? You know, that's where you're like, you can't give effective feedback to that many students a day. You just cannot. That's not, you know, you need to do a Calvin and Hobbes and run through the transmogrifier and make a bunch of you so you can you can do that. So formative assessments, you got to figure out what works best for you.
Oops, am I unmuted? Yeah, can you guys hear me? You can? Okay. I like listening to you guys. I'm like trying to take notes as I listen because it sounds like I've been focusing so much on my first quarter because I've never really gone mastery on my first quarter. And so like my second semester, what you guys are all saying, I was like, oh, I've kind of, over the last 2 years, I've shifted towards that because I've always done mastery learning for my third and fourth quarter. We do like short stories and a ton of reading. in the first quarter. Well, my whole first semester is usually synchronous, so it's been difficult this summer to try and apply different, to make it asynchronous and to make it more of a mastery based. So I made, like, as help, we got a new textbook that's completely standard based. So it's really aided me in making some mastery charts and allowing kids more choice. I'm letting them like choose what unit or what chapters and units they want to actually read, because I'm very not science minded. There's this whole chapter that's like got nonfiction and fiction, all science based. So I was like, well, that wouldn't be the one I would choose if I was going to teach the whole class, but I have a lot of kids that would really, they would probably read that over reading something else that I would pick. So they're going to get to choose, but when I'm listening to you guys, I'm thinking of my third quarter, which was my first mastery unit, which was rhetorical analysis, and I have packets of levels, like they have 4 packets. And so the first year I graded every packet, and it became such a hassle. So then this past year, I just wanted to see the packet, and it either said good enough or go back to it, and I would just put a check on it and a couple like page numbers. If they needed to go back to the drawing board, I'd hand them the packet back. And so the only thing that counted then for the end of that unit was the final assessment, which is this whole analysis guide the junior level teachers expect them to be able to do when they get into junior year. So that's the packets are kind of became were my formative, but they're like, wait, so what's my grade? I'm like, here you go. And some kids didn't even get a grade. And, you know, the first year I fell behind because it was too much work. So now listening to you guys, I'm like, oh, I was kind of moving towards it. I just wasn't calling it anything. I think the reason that I've been struggling the most is probably because I'm adjusting my entire first quarter to not only mastery, but also trying to make it standard based. And with English, there's like 5 strands of standards. So I have to find a way to do the like different types of writing and the grammar and the vocabulary ones, and then the reading, nonfiction and fiction. And so it's just kind of a headache to look at 5 strands of standards and figure out how I'm going to make it, simplified for a kid, because even my principal, when she was looking at what I've done, you're going to have to really teach the kids how to look at this. This is really overwhelming. Although she was supportive, she also was slightly overwhelmed. And my kids do well second semester because I've already done like a flipped class. Then I moved to mastery, and it's like they're comfortable making that shift, but having them come in right at the beginning has got me kind of nervous to have it all kind of be thrown at them. Nobody else does. Science department last year just started moving towards standard-based and mastery. Well, I don't know if it's mastery, but it's more of a standard-based testing. They have them choose what test they want to take, so they have like 4 levels of tests. I don't completely understand how they're doing it, but I've talked to them enough to help get ideas from what they're doing. So I'm, for the first time, not the first person going to my administration saying I want to try this, so at least they kind of broke the water for that one. But yeah, I've been kind of nervous about going back into the school year and having like not a single English teacher flips. None of my kids will have an English teacher that's done mastery, and no one will have an English teacher that's done standard based. So that's a little bit nerve-wracking. And but my principal says go ahead with it, so at least I've got that. So,
I think we could, something I'm hearing in common here that we could maybe touch on next is this idea of how do you, number 1, explain this to your students, and number 2, how do you get student buy-in? And there are no magic answers. We're not going to come up with, like, you're not going to walk away today with like a promise that your kids are all going to love this, but I think it's helpful to share around that idea. So would anybody like to start with that? When you start the year, how do you explain this to students? And it's not just the beginning of the year. How do you continue to get students to understand what you're doing, and then finally convince them that this is a good way to learn?
All right, I'll go first. I don't want to beat the sports dead horse to death because it's already dead, but I think that's a good mindset. And if it's not sports, music, or whatever, I like to tell the story of I have 2 older boys that are now 30 31 or 32 and 26, and they wrestled when they were little kids, and they'd go to these tournaments on Saturdays, and they would wrestle twice. So they'd be in a 4-man bracket, and at the end, some boy won 2 matches, and some boy lost 2 matches. But you know what? They all got a trophy. You got a trophy. Some kid was on the mat for 15 seconds because he got stuck twice, but he got a trophy. You know, what is that? When we're all exemplary elite, nobody is. And I think that I like to talk about that, because then all of a sudden, because you know, and this is communication with moms and dads too, because every mom and dad thinks Ignatius is like, little Ignatz is the best kid ever. And so you kind of have to talk to that a little bit. So I like talking about sports. I also talk about dealing with sophomores, especially because everybody wants to drive. Out here in the Midwest, every kid, when they turn 16, they expect to get a car. Here's the keys to the there's a new red Mustang in the driveway. No, it's probably a Ford F-150, but my own children would go take the driver's test, and I think all 3 of them failed the very first time, which was hard. I mean, they never failed anything in their entire life, but they hit the flag when they were doing cornerbacking. You know, they hit the flag, and as soon as they did that, they failed. And I think that was good for them, because then they realized they had to go back and learn it again. So what did we do? We went out to the school parking lot, and we practiced cornerbacking forever until, they could do cornerbacking in their, in their sleep. And so I like to use those kinds of stories to make those connections, and again, it's all about getting better, because the research. There's a guy, Alfie Kahn. I've been reading some of his blog stuff about grading, and it's like, man, as soon as you give a kid a grade, learning stops, and then that's just that's we have to get away from that mindset, and so. I don't know. We really, and I will do that this year, just continue to talk about, it's not about your grade, it's about your learning. And I'm going into a place where students think grade point average is everything. This private school is going to be like that. But I also have the experience of having sent 3 children to probably 3 of the most expensive private schools in Minnesota: St. John's University, College of St. Benedict's, and St. Olaf College, where it's like $40,000 a year. And their grade point average made a little bit of difference to what kind of aid they got, but actually their ACT scores had more impact on that than their GPA. Because how do you compare GPAs from Dassler Cokato to Benilde St. Margaret's to Springfield to wherever? How do you do that? Well, there's, because you and me, we're all different on how we assign grades, and we have how that happens across our building. So I just got to keep talking about it. It's not about your grades, folks. And last year I did a really good job of that. And I think, the feedback I got from students at the end of the year is that by the end of the year, they really got it. And so you do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, you just have to keep going back to it, because if you're the lone dog in your classroom, in your building, you are an island, and you just have to keep talking about how it's different here. How it's not about, eventually it's going to be about your grade, but if they do what they're supposed to be doing, the grade takes care of itself. And so I will continue to do that this year. Sometimes I feel like I talk too much, so I'll shut up and listen.
Mark, I have a very similar philosophy. I teach all 9th graders, and I have a mix of the honor. I'm the only 9th grade honors English teacher, and then I have the lower levels too. And my lower levels could care less about their grade because they've always done poorly, so they don't even want to know. what their grades are. Just, am I passing is all they want to know. But my honors kids are so like, what's my grade? Do I have an A? Like, they get so wrapped up into the grade that now I don't tell them what their grades are anymore. A lot of my formative stuff takes place in Edmodo, so I use Edmodo's grade book, their progress area, as kind of just, it is tracking their progress, but it doesn't give them like the marking period grade. Like, the grade book is ongoing for the whole time. So they have no idea like where that formative data fits into the into our district grade book until if I decide to move some assignments over. But I constantly, when they ask me like, well, what's my grade, Mrs. Baker? I'm like, no, dudes, it's not about the grade, it's about the learning. And they've learned through, asking me that question and my repeated answer, and they're like, they don't even ask anymore. But after the end of first marking period, they understand. And the fact that we're doing interesting and student-centered activities for them, they forget about the grade. So, I think that as long as you keep them engaged during the class period, then they're not going to worry so much about it. Oh, and extra credit? Yeah, I don't do extra credit. I do have one assignment for extra credit. And I don't know if you've heard about, like, November is National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo. Yeah. So I introduce that concept to them, and I say, okay, go write a novel. And if you write a novel at any point of this school year, if you finish it and give it to me, and it's got to be something, it's got to have some meat to it, I let them barter for whatever they want. Like, you want to get out of a test, you want a couple of extra credit, you want couple of percentage points on a marking period, I'll let you do that, but you can't get out of like anything that's departmental. So that's the only carrot I dangle for extra credit. It's pretty neat. A couple of them have taken me up on that offer over the years.
Yeah. Kate, yeah, the NaNoWriMo, I just learned about it last year, but I'm going to try and implement it somehow this year. I thought it was really cool. So I didn't know other people knew about that. I just learned about it myself, so that was cool. I feel like I introduced my kids to the idea to the mastery idea, which I feel like mastery and standard-based kind of, they complement each other. But I always tell them they have more choices. So if they need more time, choices as far as like how much time you need to work on something. If you already know I have a lot of kids at semester that move from AP to regular English. So they've already done, like, basically what I'm teaching third quarter is already covered in AP first semester. So that allows them to do the enrichment project and make their own ad campaign for rhetoric instead of analyzing and learning all the different terms and looking at so many different writings. They've already done that. They can just apply the idea of persuasion and do more creating. So this year, for my first quarter, I'm also allowing them to tell me when they're ready to assess. I'm letting them choose how they want to be assessed, so they can do a Socratic seminar, they can do a writing, or they can do the project. So I've created a rubric for each of those, just like a 4-3-2-1 rubric. So on their mastery chart, there's a link that says, think you're ready to do your assessment, and then it goes to kind of their choices. Granted, at some point, they're going to have to write something for me, but that can be any time in the semester, and they're going to have to speak at some point, but so they'll know. I guess I'm going to have to explain to them, you're going to have to at some point speak, but you're going to have the whole semester to decide when you want to speak in front of the class. They'll have like a book presentation or something that they can do at the very last thing before finals if they are terrified to talk in front of people. But I'm trying you options. It's not me dictating to you. It's, you guys have a choice. When you're ready to be assessed, how fast you want to work, how slow you want to work, if you need extra time. I think those options are powerful for a student to have, because most of the people, and at least in my department, most people, they have no choices. It's you sit down, you listen, we lecture, you take a multiple choice test, and we do it again tomorrow. And I just am like one of the only ones in my department that I can't function that way. I don't feel like it gauges understanding or learning or anything. So
I love that, Lindsay. And I think that's... Oh, God. Oh, I got it.
Where'd she go?
Can you not see?
There you go.
Oh.
Okay. Is it better? Okay, great. I just say I love that, Lindsay, and I'm kind of envious of you English people because you have those, like, it's like standards that can apply to whatever you do. You know, like whatever book you read, you know, you can do your English standards. Whatever, you know, whatever you're doing in class, you can apply those English standards across, and I love that. And that would be my goal eventually, is to go more towards that model and also giving them that choice. So I think that's super important, and I'm always trying to look more for that. Hassan entered that on the Google Doc. You know, what's your next iteration of standards-based learning look like? And that's what I have to find more ways to incorporate choice in my classroom. I just want to throw one more thing out here as we're talking about, you know, what do you do for students? Just as we're starting to think about the first day or the first week of the year, personally, what I've chosen to do last year and this year is I don't really even talk about my grading scheme the first week. I just am like, you know, don't worry about the grading yet. We'll talk about it later. And I really try to focus on that culture and as Mark was saying, we're here to learn and we're here to get better, and really think about ways I can bring that in my first week and have kids doing things together, experiencing science together in ways that establish that, instead of like laying it on them the first day, like, oh, this is going to be a different kind of class. We're going to do standards-based grading. Here's what it's going to look like, and freaking them out. You know, I want them to be, you know, invested in the culture of the classroom before I start to gently kind of ease them into that. So if other people have other good ideas about how they start the year introducing it to students, that'd be great to hear as well.
I'll just quickly say that I do tell them what my grading procedure is up front, because it's not something that they've experienced before. So I'm very explicit with that. I actually flip my course expectations. I recorded a screencast with my document of all my course expectations, and I talked through the whole thing. It's 2 15-minute videos. I know it's long for them, but it's the longest videos they'll ever watch from me. So I take the videos and put them into Edpuzzle, and I layer questions inside of it, and they have to, as a homework assignment with their parents, watch the video, answer the questions. And then they have a reflective writing piece that they have to include too, with any questions that they have for me. But I don't ever use the words flipped, and I don't ever use the word standards-based, or, you know, I just kind of leave the jargon out of it and the nomenclature out of it, and I just say, this is what I do, so that you understand this is how we're going to operate. This is our standard operating procedure, but it's not, I don't try to, you know, muddy the waters for them by saying, well, this is standards-based grade. Like, I leave that totally out of it, because as soon as you start to bring that in, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time fighting, like, the, you know, the misconceptions. Well, flipped learning, what is that? You know, it's just easier to say, this is what we do and how we handle it.
Yeah, be subversive. I like that. Don't tell them. Just do it, and then oof, you draw them in. Then you got them. I like that. Okay.
Sorry, I missed a good chunk there. But if you're still answering about buy-in, are you guys still talking about that? Well, I think what I was going to say is similar to Kate, that I used to, especially with flip learning, I used to make this whole big deal about it at the beginning of the year. And I just, you know, I don't do that anymore. And it's been the same. And part of it, I guess, is I've been doing it for a few years, so reputation, you know, precedes the class. I read an article, I think it was by, I think Julie Schell. You guys know Julie? And she wrote a blog article years ago that was actually saying something different. It was good to read it because it was different than the message I was getting from Aaron and John when I transitioned to flip learning. And she made the argument just try not to make a big deal of it. That once you make a big deal of it, then it's on the kids' radars, and then when they start to struggle, since it's on their radar, that sort of becomes the scapegoat. And so if you just sort of say, just as a matter of fact, this is how I run the class. Just like every other teacher, they have their thing or things they do, and they don't make a big spectacle of it. It's just assume this is just how Wilson runs the class, and here's why. This is why we do it, but don't make it a big deal.
Okay, I have to, oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, for me, I have sort of a pre-planned learning cycle, and they have steps they have to go through. And once in a while, I have these sort of full class activities and formative assessments that I just throw in there, just as I'm seeing that most or all kids have done certain activities. Then I'll sort of do a synchronous activity that I think they're all ready for. And then they just really, when it's time, when they feel ready to do the hot seat, that's when they come to me. Some kids I need the pressure, of course, and I need to say, where are you on this? We haven't talked yet. But for the most part, they really come see me whenever they're ready, either to show me something or to sit for a summative assessment. Excuse me. Was that the question? Did I answer your question?
Let's see here. I'm trying to share a link. There we go. I have like a mastery thing, like that's my chart for approximately 4 weeks. It looks, like I said, that's where my principal's like, that's really overwhelming, but I'll break them in. They'll be in small groups based on which unit they choose. But I put in like stop points so that if I have to go to them, because then they can say, hey, Mrs. Stephenson, we need you to check this. And so it's more checking in with me. I gave them options under formative so that they can go back and, like, if they didn't do great on a character analysis, and then when we talk about it, sometimes we just talk about it and I know they understand. And then other times it's like, hey, you might want to try and redo this. You might want to try and try this a second time. So I've given them just some, like, it's options for me, kind of like my bank of backups, but I've kind of built in, like, these are the standards you're working on, these are the stories you're reading with them, but this is what I need you to come in and tell me, or like if I miss you somehow, to say, hey, I need you to check this and initial it or something. So that's what I've done. Like I said, though, that I haven't done yet. I haven't actually, some of my rhetoric stuff looked like that, where I had a built-in stop point, but they, this may or may not work. I will let you know in about a month.
And when I do one unit asynchronous in science. Genetics is very math heavy, and I find some students just fly through it, and some it takes a little longer, so I've done that one asynchronous. And when I do that, I have kind of a checklist very similar to Lindsay's, in that, like, here's the order of things, here's the targets it applies to, here are kind of these checkpoints. And those checkpoints are built in to be either like an online little quiz that I can see real quick how they're doing, or you have to come and bring this to me, this thing you did, this write-up you did or whatever, and we're going to talk about it or whatever. When I first did an asynchronous unit a few years ago, it was just like chaos because I didn't have those checkpoints. And I think those are really important. You have to come up with quick ways where they can. It has to be the gateway to move on to the next thing. Like, you can't go on to the next thing and do that level. I have to duck out in like 10 minutes because we're gonna leave soon here to start our day in Seattle. But I didn't want to leave without making sure that we touched on everybody's questions. If you guys still want to talk about this, that's great. But I just want to mention too that Hassan had the question about year-round standards, which I think maybe you English people use. And then Kate had questions too about gradebook stuff, and so I didn't want to. She still had gradebook questions. I didn't want to leave that out of here. But real quick on my year. Oh, what was that?
I also had the question about the big summative assessment, the tests after they've already.
Oh yeah, that too. Okay, yeah. So don't drop those. I can really quickly talk. I talked about my gradebook a little bit. My year-round standards for science. I have an argumentation standard. So argumentation in science, that's based on the CER framework, claim, evidence, reasoning. So they're getting assessed on that all year. I have a modeling standard that they can take a scientific model and they can basically analyze it and talk about the merits and the limitations of that scientific model. And then I have a creation of a scientific model. This is their whiteboarding standard, essentially. So, as they're developing models, what's going on with that model and how does that work. And so those are things we're doing all year, and those are directly from the Next Generation Science Standards. I pulled out some of those processes. So that's why I'm trying to incorporate those in as my year-round processes. And then the summative testing thing, Hassan, I've tried doing... Oh, what's that?
I want to ask you a question about what you just said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And those particular standards are except for the whiteboarding one. I assume the whiteboarding one, they just have to whiteboard to meet that standard. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes that's incorporated into an argumentation standard, though, too. Like, sometimes they're writing about it. And they're talking about, like, how does their model explain the content, kind of.
That's not on the test, though.
No, it's not a test.
So those are, like, lab write-ups or some just regular writing.
A write-up or a whiteboard or actually an actual, like sometimes we have them make a video of like explaining their whiteboard, or in my anatomy class they made like actual like built models of their ideas. Like a model doesn't have to be a physical thing, but when it is a physical thing, they can build it and record it and submit that.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And then, what was the last thing? Oh, the summative assessment. I change my summative assessment every year, and I have a really hard time making a multiple choice summative assessment fit into standards-based grading. And so my inclination, Hassan, would be to do your second option and just have it be like as information for them, and how they're doing on the targets. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to see them bouncing all over the place because some kids aren't great test takers. Sometimes they just have a bad day. Sometimes it's the way you worded the question, and I don't have a lot of faith in multiple choice summative assessments. I think they have a good place in training the kids to take those kinds of assessments, and they can be feedback, like you're saying, for themselves to see how they did, but I don't know if I'd ever tie a grade to that anymore. I kind of gave up on those.
I wasn't thinking that the test would be like the quizzes in that sense. I think it would be mostly writing on the summative tests.
Okay, well that's what I do. They do written summative tests.
Have you, this is something that's occurred to me, that have a test in which I just have the standards written down and tell them, prove to me that you know them, and maybe not just a set of questions, but just here's some space to write, and just, have you ever tried that or thought of that?
Yeah, that's what I kind of did with my portfolios last year. I had student portfolios, and they had to write on each standard. Like that was their portfolio. And the other cool thing is they had to tie it into what we did in class. And the things we did in class was the evidence of their learning. So they'd be like, this is what the standard means, and this is how I learned about it in class, and I'm tying those two together because it's not just me regurgitating the information, it's an explanation of my process of learning. Like, I first thought about this, and then we did this thing in class, this lab or this activity, and then I learned this, and now that piles into the standard like this. And so that was good. That was very challenging for the students. They're not used to like thinking about their learning that way, but it pushed them to a good place.
Okay.
All of my summative assessments looked, they had the standard and then the questions right below it. And honestly, they're like, well, I mean, before that, like at the beginning there, where's the study guide? I'm like, study guide or the list of the learning targets. And really, all of my summatives were pretty much just taking those learning targets and doing something with them. It might have been just a pretty cut and dry kind of content standard. You got to show me you understand how protein synthesis works, or let's ramp it up a little bit. What happens if we introduce a toxin here that messes with protein synthesis? What are the ramifications? So there's the kind of the higher level, how do you get to exemplary? So my tests are all written. They're no multiple choice, or you got to talk. You got to talk. We're going to sit down with a chunk of whiteboard, and that's the way my summatives work.
Mark, is your class synchronous?
More synchronous than asynchronous. I will say, kind of like Amanda said with genetics or whatever it was. I would have students working on all various points of a unit, and I would try to say, okay, you should be at this point by the end of the week. Kind of like that. I would throw that out.
Are the tests on the one day, the summative?
Yes and no. I would have a day that was like, test is on Friday. If you're not ready, you're not taking it Friday. If you're ready for it on Wednesday, let's do it. And so,
like a range, kind of.
Yeah.
That's what Kate does. You do that, right, Kate?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, I'm like Amanda. I gotta go. I gotta take care of my. We gotta. We're not done here. Obviously. Start.
No, I think we need to have another hangout at some point because there's definitely lots of stuff we could talk about.
Yeah, we got questions unanswered.
Cool.
So
maybe we could stop and then another one.
Yep, sounds good to me.
We can do that.
All right. Cool beans. Thank you, everybody. This is definitely enjoyable.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Enjoy your day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.